Bright Tutee. Every student matters.
Now, these changes continued and more events occurred even after Lenin died and Stalin took over the power, took over the government in Russia. So, in 1927 and 28, between 1927 and 28, a new problem rose. And what was that problem? That was the problem of grain supplies. So, between these 2 years, it was seen that not enough grains were supplied by the villages or the peasants and the cultivators into the markets where the grains were sold. So, there was scarcity of grain. And during this time, you must remember, Stalin headed the government. Lenin had died and Stalin was now the head of the government. And it was believed that the scarcity of grain was a big problem because the rich peasants were holding the grains. Now, you must remember that this was the time where the prices of all commodities are same. So, despite the high demand or the low demand of the grains or other food grains, the price of it remains the same, which means that the peasants and the cultivators cannot have profit or it can be in loss. That was not the major factor. They could not gain profit or they could gain loss, but the price remained the same. Now, when between 1927 and 28, there was a huge scarcity of grain, supplies of grain in the markets. It was believed by the government that the rich peasants were holding the supplies of the grains for themselves within their houses, so that they could sell these grains when the prices increase. So this was believed by the government, and this belief angered the government, and as a result, in reaction to what they believed, in 1928 kulaks were raided. Now, what are kulaks? Kulaks are rich peasants. So the rich peasants were called kulaks. So the government, as I told you, the government believed that these kulaks held the grain supplies with themselves and they were not supplying it to the market with the hope that the rice there will be rise in the prices, and when the rise in the prices happen, they will sell their grains in the market so that they get more profit. And because of this belief, in 1928, the kulaks were raided. So the military and the forces of the government were sent into the holdings, into the houses of these kulaks, and they were raided. The supplies were confiscated by the government and taken away. And following this incident, the government he decided that there was a need to establish state-controlled large farms. So earlier, farms were smaller and they were cultivated, they were owned by individual people or families, and they made their cultivation and sold the food grains in the market. And the government believed that these individuals and families could not bring large production. The large decrease in large production was because these lands and farms were worked by individuals and small families. So the government decided that these small families be brought together in a large farms, and if they work collectively in these large farms, then the production would multiply. There would be more production. So, believing in this plan, the government, the Stalin's government introduced collectivization program. Now, two questions from this section may arise. One is for you to write few lines about kulaks, and the second is to write about Stalin's collectivization program. Now, first, what do you write about kulaks? We just learned that kulaks were rich peasants, and in 1927 and 1928 there was shortage of supplies of grains in the market in Russia. Why? Because these kulaks were holding their food grains with themselves, because the prices of the food grains were fixed, and they thought if they hold and if they hold their grains, and if the grains are not sent to the market and there is a scarcity which emerges as a result of this holding, then the rise of the price will be declared by the government, and when the price will rise, then they would sell their food grains. So this was why the kulaks were holding their food grains with themselves in their houses. But when the government came to realize that the kulaks were holding their grains, in 1928 the government sent forces to raid the kulaks, and as a result their food grains were confiscated and taken by the government. Now, as a result of this, the government brought about a new policy, and that policy is called collectivization program. And what was this collectivization program? In this, all peasants cultivated in collective farms. So there were no longer smaller farms where few individual farmers or peasants or families cultivated and sold their produce. As a result of the collectivization programs, these smaller farms were brought together to form larger farms, and these larger farms were known as collective farms and kolkhos. And these kolkhos were worked by many peasants, all peasants together collectively, so that their collective work may produce large amount of food grains. Now, of course, all peasants did not like this policy of Stalin or of the government, and they resisted. They said, we will not go and cultivate the collective land or the collective farms along with other peasants and other farmers. We want to cultivate our own farms, and we want to sell our own produce. So when the peasants were resisting, they also destroyed their livestock. They destroyed their animals, their cattle, like if they had cows, if they had goat, lambs, they all destroyed it, and they destroyed their lands. So this was a form of protest to the government, saying that we do not want what you want us to do. But what happened as a result of the collectivization program was it did not see mass production of food grains. The government thought that by collective farming of large farms by all peasants working together, it would produce grains in huge quantity. But this did not happen. There was no growth in production. There was no increase in production. As a matter of fact, these years of 1927-28 saw famine. So famine is a natural calamity where there is no good harvest. There is no production in food grains, and this results in no food for the people. People go hungry, and this goes for a long time, sometimes for months and years. So this is called a famine. The same situation occurred in Russia during this time, as a result of which 4 million Russians died. So the collectivization program of Stalin was not received well by the people of Russia. It was criticized, obviously, because it brought not good harvest, not increase in production, but decrease in production of food grains, as well as famines. And this caused more problems in the Russian societies instead of good development. So people began to criticize the government and the government's policies, but the government did not take these criticisms well. People who criticized the government were punished. They received severe punishments. They were murdered. They were sent to prisons, they were sent to labor camps, and some were also exiled. They were banished from Russia. They were asked to leave the country and go wherever they wanted. This is called banishment. So all these things happened to people who criticized the government and the government's policies. So by 1939, over 2 million Russians were in prisons or labor camps. So you can imagine the number of people who were unsatisfied and raised their voice against the government's policies, and how the government treated these people by sending them to prisons, labor camps, exiling them, and also murdering them. Many of the people who were sent to prison and behind bars during this time were very talented philosophers, very talented writers.
Now, subscribe to Bright Tutee course at ₹1 per day only. Download Bright Tutee app from Play Store and get the online courses prepared by competent and experienced teachers for different education boards of classes 6 to 10. Bright Tutee courses are available for the subjects of Math, Science, Social Science, English and Hindi in English and Hindi medium. Bright Tutee follows 3-step approach, that is learning, assessment and exam preparation. In learning, topic-wise video lectures with explanation of concepts and discussion of textbook examples and questions are available with the solutions. In assessment, topic-wise online MCQ test, practice assignments and chapter-wise question bank are available with the solutions. In exam preparation, previous year's question papers, sample papers and model test papers are available with the solutions. Sign up today on Bright Tutee and avail your courses at affordable prices.